because we'd like the kiss and we'd like the embrace. But especially when we're learning Torah, which itself is such an intimate act, we want to make sure there's a real kiss going on. So we want to make sure, of course, my mind is involved. I can't be learning Torah without my mind. But I want to make sure my voice is involved as well. I want to make sure my lips are moving and my voice is audible. So there's a real intimate, deep kiss going on between me and God when I do the most intimate thing I could ever do with God, which is study his Torah. All right, so we are toward the end of chapter 45, not a long chapter, and let us get started on this. We are on page 128, the second of the 2 pages of this chapter, about 10 lines from the top. So what we've developed until now in the chapter is this idea of compassion on our soul, understanding where she came from, understanding where she came to, understanding that we can have transgressions on record that can add barriers between her and what she wants, which is God, and just feeling the compassion for her existence, which is to help us elicit a very strong love for God. So this is actually considered a easier road. Compassion makes a lot of sense, and the compassion naturally flows to the love. So this is almost like an easier road to get a very strong love for God. And we're going to see this historically, like the first antecedent, the first time we saw this technique in action with our forefathers, with Yaakov, with Jacob, in his first encounter with Rachel, with Rachel. So even before we read this, let me just sort of explain the story, if you don't know, and the Kabbalistic symbolism of the story. So Yaakov, Jacob, is searching for a wife. He had to run away. He had to leave his brother his brother Esau, who's wanting to kill him. He ran away. He took a detour of many years studying Torah. And then he's finally coming now to Haran to find a wife. And he sees in the field approaching Rachel. And it says that he saw her, he kissed her, he cried. What's going on? Why is he kissing her? And why is he crying? So the Rebbe explains that Yaakov, Jacob, and Rachel, they were human beings. There was a human being called Yaakov, called Jacob. There was a human being called Rachel. They absolutely were people. They got married, they produced children, we're their descendants, people. But they also were the embodiment of divine forces. As was Abraham, the embodiment of God's trait of kindness, as was Yitzchak, Isaac, the embodiment of God's trait of judgment, of awe, of nullification. So Yaakov, Jacob, was the embodiment of God's trait that we call in the Hebrew Tiferes, which means beauty, and which is really, in its emotional expression, compassion. So Jacob was the human embodiment of God compassion. And as the Rebbe explains, inside, I'm like pre-teaching here, this was compassion on the level of the world of Atzilus. Atzilus, remember, being the highest of the 4 spiritual realms. Atzilus, which we could translate as the world of being, because it's so close to God. So within the world of Atzilus, we have God's emotive traits, God's kindness, embodied by Abraham, God's strength, embodied by Isaac, and God's beauty, God's compassion, God's truth, Torah, embodied by Jacob. Rachel also was the embodiment of a divine attribute of Atzilus, of the world of being. What was she the embodiment of? She was the embodiment of the final of the 10 divine traits. She was the embodiment of Malchus, sovereignty. We have 3 intellectual traits. We have what we might call 7 emotional, but they're really 6 emotions, and the 7th is a state of being. Malchus, sovereignty. And sovereignty, Malchus, of the world of Atzilus, of the world of being, is the source of all the souls. The repository of souls is sourced in Malchus of Atzilus. So Jacob is representing divine compassion, compassion of the world of Atzilus, the highest of the four spiritual worlds, a world of being. Rachel represents the Jewish people. And when compassion sees the source of the Jewish people, he cries. And now, with all that pre-teaching, let's read inside and hopefully it'll be very, very clear. So with everything we've learned above, and we've focused on the trait of compassion, and we understand we're supposed to have compassion, and we understand it's actually very natural to have compassion for our soul when we think where she came from, where she is now, the world that's a barrier, our transgressions that are a barrier, the distance, that it's so easy to have compassion for our soul. And why? Well, let's see historically this concept. So this is what's written, Vayisa Yaakov, Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel, Vayisas Kolo Vayev. And Jacob kissed to Rachel, and he lifted his voice, and he cried. Ki Rachel hi Knesset Yisrael, because Rachel embodies the repository of all souls, the source of all the souls of the Jewish people. V'Yaakov and Jacob, b'midaso halyona, in his supernal dimension, she midas harachamim sheba'atzilos, is the embodiment of compassion in the world of Atzilus, the highest of the spiritual world, the world of being. Hu hama'orer rachamim rabim aleha. So Jacob went into his trait. He's compassion. He's encountering for the first time ever the source of the Jewish people, as embodied in Rachel. And he cries deliberately to elicit divine compassion on the Jewish people. Vayisas Kolo, he lifted his voice because he wasn't trying to tap what he was. He was trying to tap much higher. Lemaila, beyond his spiritual source, lemekor harachamim ha'elyonim. He wanted to go to the source of supernal compassion. Shemidas harach, sorry, I just lost place. Hanikra of harachamim, the father of compassion. Umakairam, their source. What the Rebbe is saying here is, Jacob embodies divine compassion within a spiritual world. Again, we use the word world loosely because nothing is physical here. And time and space are physical coordinates. So there's no real spatial dimensions here. But so we don't go crazy, we think of it as like the world of Atzilus. That is the highest of the four worlds within what we call Seder Hishtalshalus, the progression, the evolution of spiritual realities until we come to the point and purpose of it all, our physical reality. It's the highest one, it's the most spiritual one, it's the closest to God. The word Atzilus is from either the word Eitzel, which means like next to God, or Ne'etzal, evolving directly from God. So in this world, every one of God's traits are huge, but they're still limited because they're still within a world. So Jacob, Yaakov, is embodying compassion within the world of Atzilus that's enormous, but there's still a limitation because it's within a world. He wants to do his thing, but bigger than his thing, because here's Rachel approaching. Here's Rachel, and of course he sees and senses this isn't just this young girl, this isn't just this sweet, holy girl. This is the source of the Jewish people. That's what he's all about. The whole idea of Jacob was to create the Jewish people. This is a spiritual source. This is the source of the repository of all souls. So he immediately wants to, as I'm saying, do his thing, draw down divine mercy on the Jewish people. But he doesn't want it to be the mercy that he embodies, because the mercy that he embodies is still limited. It's limited to the parameters of a spiritual world. That means a dimension, limitation, box, though quite large, but still a box of Atzilus. So Vayisa es Kolo, as the Alter Rebbe points out, he lifts up his voice to go higher than being the embodiment of compassion of the world of Atzilus, to the source of compassion higher than Atzilus. Because the source of compassion is embedded within the ultimate crown, the Keser, beyond Atzilus. And within that dimension is what we call the 13 traits of compassion, the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim. So the 13 traits of compassion are the source of compassion, and they're beyond the limitations of Atzilus. They're limitless. They're the source of compassion. That's what Jacob was crying to lift up his voice, to access, to draw down, not the amazing, but still in a certain sense limited compassion of Atzilus, but the limitless compassion of the source of compassion as it's embedded in the 13 divine attributes within Keser Atzilus. And the Rebbe says that's what we refer to as of Harachamim. Now this really only works in the Hebrew, but I'll translate it to the English. Sometimes in our prayers, you might know a nuance of sometimes we say of Harachaman, and sometimes we say of Harachamim. Here's the difference. In English, I would translate of Harachaman as merciful Father. Of Harachamim, Father of mercy. So of Harachaman, merciful Father, it's already an adjective, it's a modifier, it's limited. That's compassion within the world of Atzilus. That's what Yaakov embodied, of Harachaman, merciful Father. He was lifting himself up, so to speak, lifting up his voice, stretching himself to of Harachamim, Father of mercy. Father meaning source. Father of mercy, source of mercy. So of Harachaman, merciful Father, compassion within the world of Atzilus. Of Harachamim, Father of mercy, the 13 attributes of compassion, compassion in their source, embedded within the Keser, the crown, hovering, so to speak, over or the upper peripheral edge of Atzilus. And that's what Jacob was trying to do when he saw Rachel, to draw down compassion on the source of the souls of the Jewish people, from which emerged the souls of the Jewish people, from which became us, the Jewish people. Vayev. And he cried. So he's lifting up his voice to extend himself high from the fifth dimension of planet Atzilus to beyond that, to the Keser, to the crown, which again isn't okay. You're saying it's 6 steps away, but it's a very big jump to get to that step. So he's crying, Lo'oirer, because crying arouses mercy, right? Our children know that. Jacob also knew that. He's the divine attribute of mercy. He's crying literally to arouse God's mercies on the Jewish people. To elicit, to draw down from there the bountiful compassion on all of the souls. And not just on the souls, but on the source of the souls. Just as he's accessing the source of compassion, to draw down compassion on the source of the souls. Why do we need such compassion? Because we're stuck in exile. To elevate them from their state of exile, uliyachadan biyichud ha'elyon or in sof baruchu, and to fuse them with this absolute unity, with this supernal fusion, with the limitless light of God. So when Jacob sees Rachel, when Yaakov, embodying God's compassion of the world of Atzilus, sees Rachel embodying the source of all souls, he's like, whoa, God, draw down compassion on the Jewish people. I see them in their exile. Now, seeing us in our exile was from the beginning of time until now. It didn't just start 1900 years ago. Because, of course, there's a geographic exile that's been in place for 1900 plus years. But also, as the Rebbe is pointing out, there's an exile that the Jew and the divine presence are not one, are not united, are not fused. So that means this exile can be when we were in Israel, when we had a temple. We're in Israel with a temple, and we're in exile. Absolutely. In Israel with a temple, but that's not yet the revelation of Mashiach. We don't yet have the redemption, and therefore, the Jews in Israel with a temple, and he's in exile. He's separate from God. He's separate from the infinity of God. So when Jacob is looking at us, and he's looking a long road, a long perspective, and he sees, not just at this moment when he's seeing Rachel, and of course, she's embodying exile here, the source of the souls of the Jewish people stuck in the house of Lavan. I mean, that's a pretty intense exile. In a place called Haran, that's a pretty intense exile. But he's not just focused on her pain, on her exile. He's seeing the exile of the Jewish people from then until now. And he wants to rectify the situation. He wants to help the Jew become one with God. So what does he do? So we saw so far two of the things he did, right? The verse said three. He kissed, he lifted his voice, he cried. The Rebbe so far explained two. Why did he lift up his voice? Because he didn't just want to give the Jewish people what he was. He wanted to go much higher to the source of compassion. And why did he cry? To elicit that source. To draw down this compassion on the Jewish people that the Jew and God should be one. And that's why he kissed, as we're now going to explain. Bibchinas neshikin. He wanted to create a relationship between the Jews and God like a kiss. There's a kiss. We're also going to explain there's a hug. There's a unity, a fusion between us and God. And of course, in our world, there's a kiss, that's a physical thing, and there's a hug, and it's a physical thing. And those things can sometimes be very powerful in our world because they do have a power, because they're all mirroring an extension of the divine kiss and the divine hug. We're in chapter 45, and we are towards the end of it. It's a short chapter. So let's discuss, what does this mean, a divine kiss? Shehi istapkus rucha berucha. The kiss means the mingling of the breaths, a breath-to-breath connection, a clinging spirit to spirit. So you could say, well, okay, clinging spirit to spirit, that makes sense, but why are we calling this thing a kiss for? So the Rebbe says, what are you talking about? Let's look at the verse. What does it say in Shir HaShirim? K'moshe Kasuf, as is written, Yashkeni minashikos pihu. He'll kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. That's what the Jewish people are saying in terms of God. That there's going to be a divine kiss, a mouth to mouth, lips to lips, breath to breath connection between the Jew and God. And that's a kiss. As the Rebbe says, Dahainu, what does this mean? Hiskashrus dibur adam edvar havaya zu halacha. When my mouth becomes one with the mouth of God, that's a real kiss. That's a divine kiss. Well, how's my mouth one with the mouth of God? Because if my lips are saying God's words, there's a mingling of my mouth and God's mouth, of my breath and God's breath. It's like God's words are coming out of my mouth. God's breath is coming out of my breath. So there's this fusion, there's this mingling, there's this oneness between the breath, the mouth, the lips of man and of God. And that is the divine kiss. And from that can evolve things in this world as well. Because it all starts by God. So why do we have a kiss in this world? Because there's a divine kiss. Because there's a connection between us and God. Just like our sages say, why does this world have gold? Like gold is too precious, too beautiful for this world. Well, gold was given to this world because there's something called God's temple. And for God's temple, there should be gold. And from God's temple, gold came into the world and was used for other things as well. So this kiss is achieved every single time a Jew is studying Torah. And specifically notice the Rebbe focuses, as many times we focus, on halacha, law. And as we've discussed this, touched on this many times in the study of Tanya, the enormous importance of the study of Jewish law, which does not mean a lessening of the importance of studying any other part of Torah, but just means there's a certain heightened specialness to say the words of law, because law is, in its purest way, the will of God, a real expression of his core self, because our self is our will. And what God desires, that's Jewish law. So when the mouth of a Jew, is saying words of Torah, especially when saying Jewish law, but truly when saying all words of Torah, my mouth and God's mouth, my words and God's words, my breath and God's breath have become one. And that's the intimacy, that's the kiss of a Jew and God. B'chein, and also, we don't only have a mouth-to-mouth connection, we can have machshava b'machshava, a thought-to-thought connection, a fusion of the thoughts of the Jew and the thoughts of God. When I'm thinking, when I'm studying his Torah, we can also have an action-to-action connection, a body-to-body connection. Umaisa b'maisa, the action of the Jew becoming the action of God. Shumaisa hamitzvahs, which is the action of the commandments. So the Rebbe said, when the Jew is saying words of Torah, it's a kiss. When the Jew is thinking words of Torah as he says those words of Torah, it's an even more intimate kiss, because the breath-to-breath connection is coming from a much deeper place. And when the Jew does an action that's a commandment, when the body of Jew is fused with the, so to speak, body of God, that's a hug. That's a divine embrace. So mouth to mouth, we explained at length why that's the kiss. We understand when we're incorporating our thoughts. Now, obviously, to say words of Torah, you do need to be thinking and understanding. If we're learning Torah mindlessly, it didn't really count. But the more we invest our mind and we have this mouth to mouth, breath to breath, but an even deeper breath, like an even deeper inner dimension of self invested in this kiss, this is a very intimate kiss between the Jew and God. And then, seeming on a very different level, when I do an action that is a body expression of God. Of course, the most common one, so it comes to my head, is the act of giving charity, as the Rebbe is going to focus on. But any other whole body commandment, I mean, obviously for a woman, when she immerses in a mikvah, in a ritual pool, but any body commandment, you're dressing modestly, it's a body commandment. If you're going to a mitzvah, it's a body commandment. If you're cooking for someone, it's a body commandment. Anything that uses your physical body. Your body is fused with, so to speak, the body of God. Just as your mouth is one with his mouth, and your thoughts are one with his thoughts. Your arm is one with his arm. Your body is one with his body. And that, the Rebbe says, that's not a kiss. That's a hug. That's an embrace. Ubifrat maisat tzedakah v'chesed. And most especially, I'm not saying exclusively, because it's true every time we use our body to express his will, but especially when we're doing acts of charity, acts of kindness, because we really see in the verses, in the quotes, this concept of charity as God's right arm. So the right arm of God and the right arm of man, like in an embrace. That's the idea of the embrace between my body and, so to speak, God. The chesed roya yamina, because as we know, it says that chesed, kindness, is the divine right arm. That's a proof. That's from the Zohar. That's Kabbalistic. But we also see this in the revealed parts of Torah, the same concept. And this is literally considered a divine embrace, as is written, V'yimino techabkeni, Song of Songs. His right arm will embrace me. So the Rebbe says we see in the mystical dimension of Torah, in the Zohar, and we see in the revealed dimension of Torah, in scriptures, Tanakh, Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs, we see in both of them this concept. Chesed roya yamina, kindness is the right arm of God. That was Kabbalistic from the Zohar. V'yamino techapkeni. His right arm will embrace me. That's from Shir Shirim, Song of Songs. So every time we do a commandment with our body, we're part of a divine embrace. And especially if the commandment is charity or kindness. Because that's what we see here so clearly written, that we have this embrace with God when my arm and his arm have become one. And then the Rebbe says, so we spoke of the kiss, we spoke of the embrace, and now we're saying, again, it's not just when you say words of Torah, specifically words of halacha. Because there, when the Rebbe spoke about it the first time, the focus was on like my lips, the kiss, saying the words. But really, even more deeply, the Rebbe is saying, when you really immerse yourself in studying Torah, that's a real, as we're saying, inner breath to inner breath connection. That's a real divine kiss. So the involvement in Torah, in one's speech and one's thoughts with depth, this is literally the divine kiss. Meaning, every time you learn, you're supposed to be talking. Now, obviously, I'm assuming everyone is quiet, even though everyone is muted. So you're all piggybacking on my words because you're in a class setting. But when you're learning yourself, you have the book open, English, Hebrew, Yiddish, French, doesn't make a difference what. You're looking on the screen and you're reading. You have it in front of you and you're reading. Your mouth is supposed to be saying those words audibly, which often is hard when you're learning. It's really, you have to really train yourself to do it. For many people, that's not natural. But a number of times in Tanya, the Rebbe comes to this point that it's very important to engage our mouth and our vocal cords when we're serving God. You know, of course, we speak naturally and we don't think about turning on our voice, as some people that have difficulty with speech, of course, have to focus on turning on their voice, not just moving the lips the appropriate way, but actually cranking up the voice. But when we pray or when we study, we sort of regress to that category, which means when we pray, for many of us, we know we have to move our lips. I mean, we know that's the injunction of prayer. And if you don't move your lips, you like didn't say the words. So most of us know we move our lips when we pray, but a lot of us do that very inaudibly. And even more so when we study Torah. Even more so when we study Torah, most of us don't even move our lips, let alone have any audible sound. And in a number of places of Tanya, the Rebbe comes back to this point again and again and again, because there's a spiritual concept here. Yeah, there is the law, by the way, and there's also the spiritual truth. So legally, when you pray, your lips have to be moving, and there has to be a voice. The sound has to be audible. And when you learn, you're really required to do the same as well. We're told sometimes if you're in very, very deep contemplation, I don't know if any of us ever access that level of learning. So I think we could all safely assume that our level of learning, there's supposed to be movement of lips and a voice. I am completely talking to myself as I say this, as well as to anyone else, because it took me a lot of training to get to the point that my voice should be audible when I pray. I'm still like, striving to make sure when I study, my lips should be moving and my voice should be audible. But the Rebbe is bringing this in here, that this is really a pulling in the spiritual connection. You want, ideally, every time you serve God, you want it to be a complete experience. A complete experience means you're engaging your mind, your words, and your actions. So, for example, if you put money in a charity box, well, that's an action. But if you say with it a verse like, greatest charity that it brings redemption, or this charity is for whatever, I'm giving this charity for this child, I'm giving this charity to protect the Jewish people, I'm giving this charity for Israel, now I'm also engaging my lips. And if I'm focused and thinking about what I'm saying at the same time, because sometimes we can talk on automatic pilot, I'm engaging my mind. So the act of charity moved from being one-dimensional, only engaging my action to being complete, using my thoughts, using my speech, and using my action. Ideally, every time we serve God, we actually want to use all three. Now, this is not to create stress on anyone. So if you're like, whoa, take what works for you, see how you can incorporate this. Maybe you can find one thing you do and you could say, all right, God, here I'll try to engage all three. But based on what we're learning in the chapter, you understand why. Because when I, like in my example, give the charity, saying and thinking, this is to protect the land of Israel, this is to protect the people of Israel, this is to protect this child, this is to protect this child, this is to bring redemption, and I'm thinking and I'm saying and I'm doing, I now am connecting to God on all these levels. There's a hug going on, I'm giving the charity, and there's a kiss as well, because my mind and my words are also one with God's. So that's like a general perspective. And specifically, the Rebbe is saying and focusing us, the most intimate thing we do with God is study His Torah. We're in no deeper place of connection than when we study His Torah. That's our moment of greatest oneness, greatest, deepest intimacy. So for sure there, we would like it to be a whole body experience. We would like our mind to be invested. Well, of course, that's easy. If your mind's not invested, you're not studying Torah. We need our lips to be moving and our voice to be heard, which is, in a sense, easy, so to speak, because actually you're obligated to do that, so you're supposed to be doing that. And we would like to be doing an action as well. In some way, writing in notes, or even if you're reading from a book and moving your finger along the page, whatever you could do to incorporate action, because we'd like the kiss and we'd like the embrace. But especially when we're learning Torah, which itself is such an intimate act, we want to make sure there's a real kiss going on. So we want to make sure, of course, my mind is involved. I can't be learning Torah without my mind. But I want to make sure my voice is involved as well. I want to make sure my lips are moving and my voice is audible. So there's a real intimate, deep kiss going on between me and God when I do the most intimate thing I could ever do with God, which is study His Torah. Any questions, any thoughts, any reflections on any of this? Because I know I was talking for a long time straight.
Hi, Rebbetzin. Yeah, I have a thought. You know, when Yaakov wanted to bring us to the closeness of God through the kiss that he kissed Rachel, so we do have the breath of Hashem in us. That's how He created us, right? Through the breath, to the breath.
Yes.
Okay, and so eventually with the Geula Amitit and Hashlema, we are going to be transformed like Adam, where he could see all the godliness with his own eyes.
Absolutely.
And so I'm thinking that might be where Yaakov himself wanted to be, and also bring us to that point of the connection, unlimited connection almost with Hashem.
Very possible.
And because I think I told you one time that one rabbi, a big rabbi who saw the Rebbetzin and the Rebbe walking, I think somewhere in Europe, he looked through over the window and he said, there is Adam and Chava walking, which means that's where we are heading.
Right. Oh,
And
definitely. Yeah, 100%. Definitely by the redemption, by Mashiach, we will see godliness. Absolutely. 100%.
and also about getting closer to Hashem. Like when I don't always feel like going and reading all this Tehillim in the morning before I get to anything else, or but the minute you start seeing the words and saying them, it's just like almost you can't stop, because it just pulls you. It just pulls you closer and closer. And I mean that's what happens with me normally. So yeah, definitely.
Definitely right. Yes, there's a mashicha, a draw, a pull, and especially if you're doing in the morning before we get really immersed in all the junk of this world, it's where it's a
Yeah,
little easier to feel the sweetness of it. Absolutely. 100,
exactly.
100%. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this? Any other reflections or applications? This is
Can
meant to
you
be
say Can you say that Yaakov, like Adam, was seeing the souls till the end of time? Is that what he was seeing?
I don't know. Because, yeah, especially right, based on what Rachel said, you could sort of wonder. It doesn't say. It says he saw Rachel as the Makor Nishmos Kol Yisrael, as seeing the source of all souls. So I don't know what he saw. I don't know if he saw to the level of the souls of all times, or he just saw in general the general concept of that level of God's energy, Malchus of Atzilus, where all the souls are in like a almost like the repository of souls. It's called, right? The Rebbe said it's Knesset Yisrael. Like we say, a shul is a Beit Knesset. The word Knesset means kinus, like a gathering. It's the ingathering of all the souls. It's where they're all housed. It's not where they're from. Souls are from far higher than Malchus. Souls are from Chachma Vatzilas, the highest level. Malchus is the 10th level. But from the highest level, Chachma Vatzilos, where the souls emerge from, then their home as they wait until they come into this world is in Malchus of Atzilus. So that's what he was seeing. But he saw, as he saw those souls, he saw the gullus of the souls. He saw the souls that would be in exile because they wouldn't be united with God. And that was the point of compassion, that the soul and God should be one.
Well, if you saw the souls in Gullus, I hope you saw the souls in Geula too.
I can't imagine that Hashem held that back from him, because otherwise it probably would have been a very, very, very painful. I don't know. It says that Moshe saw everything that would happen until the redemption. That means he didn't see within the redemption, but I assume he saw the beginning of the unfolding, because then what happened? Where's the beauty? Where's the purpose and point of it all? So I don't know how deeply into the days of Mashiach Moshe saw, but I hope he saw the very beginning unfold. So he had that hope, because he saw a lot of pain until then, right? That's why it says that's why Moses was the most humble of all men, it says, because God showed him all generations until now, until our final generation. And it says that when Moses saw us, when he saw that final generation, and the world is so dark, and we're still holding on, we humbled Moses. So I hope God, who has ultimate compassion, so I'm sure that God showed him also the beginning of Geula, of the redemption, to end sweet.
Well, that feels better.
Anyone else? All right, so let us finish this off. Now, we just went through this sort of beautiful vision of a divine kiss and a divine embrace, and it's like a beautiful concept, and it's sort of nice to repackage what we do for God within that framework. Oh, every time I'm studying Torah, that's me and God in a kiss. Every time I'm doing a physical commandment, that's me and God embracing. Now we want to get back, so to speak, to why we're talking about this, in terms of using this compassion as a technique for us to have a very strong relationship with God. But we're not done with this kiss and embrace concept, and we're going to use it in the next two chapters as well. We're going to actually develop it more extensively, this idea of the divine kiss and the divine embrace, as really a means of how to frame and understand our relationship with God. But for now, so when we think of this, and everything here, so to speak, that the Rebbe was telling us was in a sense all proving the concept of the importance of compassion. Look, our forefathers, when Jacob first sees Rachel, he goes in his compassion mode. Compassion, to draw down compassion on the souls of the Jewish people. The Rebbe says, that's what I'm telling you to do. Your Jacob element, over your Rachel element, so to speak. Draw down compassion on your soul. Jacob, of course, could do it much bigger. And of course, what he was drawing on compassion was much bigger. The embodiment of compassion, reaching the source of compassion, to draw compassion on the source of all the Jewish souls. But me, I'm doing it in my own small way. I'm having compassion on my soul. That's what the Rebbe is telling us to do. And look, we see the historical precedent. We see this was the first thing that Jacob did when he saw Rachel. Because from here, from the compassion, we come to tremendous, tremendous love, flaming, reaching, fully expressed in our hearts. Now, we've discussed many times in these chapters, how can we feel a love for God? Some of us have it a little easier, some of us have it a lot harder. How do we feel a love for God? And the point the Rebbe was saying in this chapter, which we will continue developing in the next two chapters, is that compassion is a very strong gateway to love. Now, we discussed this for the first time when we learned chapter 32 of Tanya. There in chapter 32, we were talking interpersonally. If there's a person that's difficult, not very nice to you, or not a very nice person, or worse, and you could feel bad, you could have a negative emotion for that person. So the Rebbe said, have compassion. As we now understand, have compassion for their soul stuck in their body. And the Rebbe said, compassion has a tremendous power to minimize the negativity, to minimize the hatred, and to free the love. So if there's a person in your world who's difficult, instead of having a negative feeling towards them, have compassion for them. I mean, they live with themselves all day long. And as you have compassion for them, you won't feel negative emotions, and you actually will feel love. That's what we discussed in chapter 32. And that's exactly what we're saying here. I mean, of course, we don't have the negative emotion we're trying to minimize because that's not relevant. But otherwise, it's the exact same tool. Compassion is easy for me to feel, the Rebbe is saying. Look where my soul started. Look where she is. Look at the discrepancy. Look at the barriers of being in a physical world. Look at the barriers of being within my sin. There's a lot to naturally feel compassionate for my soul over. And compassion is the direct road to love. So the more I feel compassion for my soul, it's just so natural for me to feel that love of God. Because we've been discussing trying to reach love of God, and we were like, maybe it's only going to stay in your mind. Maybe it's in the recesses of your heart. Maybe you have a hard time with emotions. Maybe you have a hard time with emotions for God. So the Rebbe is aware, like it's not so easy for us always. The Rebbe says, this is the easy road, as we will continue and develop more next chapter. This is the easy road. Because compassion makes a lot of sense. Compassion should be very easy to feel. And compassion naturally unlocks love. As the Rebbe says, Kidirsiv, as is written, Liyakov asher pada es Avraham, to Jacob who redeemed Abraham. That's a verse from Isaiah, from Yeshaya, as explained in another place, as we brought this exact verse in chapter 32. To Jacob who frees Abraham. Yaakov asher podes Avraham. We mentioned many times today that Jacob, is divine compassion. And we did mention that Abraham, is divine love, kindness. Yaakov asher podes Avraham, to Jacob who frees Abraham, compassion frees love. So to directly approach loving God, which we've tried to do many, many times in the past 44 chapters, maybe you got it down pat and you're good. And maybe it's challenging for you. If it's challenging for you, the Rebbe is saying, that's why I'm giving you this chapter. Of course, even if it wasn't challenging for you, this chapter has many beautiful concepts that are worth absorbing. But especially if it's challenging for you. Because compassion, that should be natural. And compassion naturally frees our love. So the more you have compassion for your soul, the more it will just be like you just unplugged something. The waters are gushing out, right? You pulled up the cork and the waters are gushing out. You're naturally going to feel a strong love for God. With that, we conclude chapter 45, and we will develop this even more powerfully in the next chapter. One of my favorite chapters or concepts of Tanya is the beginning of chapter 46, which takes everything we just said and makes it really powerful and very, very, very practical. But we are not going to do it next week because Gullah's plans means next week. I don't know exactly what time the fast is over, but it's probably going to end sometime toward, I don't know. I looked at the calendar. I wasn't sure which time we follow, but definitely like after the class starts and everyone's gonna be drained and eating. So I'm like, all right, we're gonna have to wait 2 weeks. But we're starting a really, 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 really great point. Really exciting how we take all these ideas, don't forget them. Got 2 weeks to work on them. Chapter 45, because we're gonna apply it in such a strong, powerful way that literally the tool the Rebbe is teaching us in chapter 46 to me is one of the strongest things I ever got out of Tanya.